Do you remember those forgotten 10-minute breakfasts you could only find in old cookbooks? They filled busy mornings with simple, no-fuss meals that got everyone out the door. Crazy how the best ones vanished without a trace, isn't it? Buttered cornflake toast was one of those forgotten 10-minute breakfasts that once lived in every kid's cookbook or church bulletin. You would toast a slice of soft white bread, slather it with butter or peanut butter if you had it, then smash some cornflakes on top. That was it. Crunchy, sweet, filling, and ready before the school bus pulled up. It was not some gourmet recipe, just a quick fix that felt special on rushed mornings. Most families kept cereal on hand anyway, and this was a way to stretch it when the grocery budget was tight. Sometimes parents sprinkled sugar on top, other times it was plain, but either way it turned leftover cereal into breakfast that actually stuck with you. You could even swap peanut butter for jam or just plain butter, depending on what was left in the fridge. These kinds of quick breakfasts were everywhere in old cookbooks. Simple, made from pantry staples, and good enough to get everyone out the door without complaints. Scrambled eggs with evaporated milk were one of those frugal breakfasts tucked inside old homemaker guides and church fundraisers from the 1940s through the 70s. The secret was canned milk. You would crack your eggs, whisk in a splash of evaporated milk, and fry them up fast. The milk made them fluffy, rich, and stretch further than plain eggs alone. This mattered more than people today might think. During wartime and lean grocery weeks, a can of evaporated milk was gold. It lasted longer than fresh milk, cost less, and made ordinary eggs feel like a treat. Some families tossed in herbs or cheese if they had extra, but most kept it plain. Soft eggs with just a little salt and pepper. Quick, simple, and done in under 10 minutes. You will not find this recipe on Instagram or in trendy brunch spots, but it kept families fed and mornings moving. People used what they had, made it work, and turned humble ingredients into something satisfying. Apple ring pancakes were straight out of those old Betty Crocker cookbooks and Sunday church potlucks that every neighborhood seemed to have. You would slice an apple into thick rings, dip them in pancake batter, and fry them up on the griddle. The result was a warm, fluffy pancake wrapped around sweet fruit, all ready in under 10 minutes. Kids loved them because it felt like dessert for breakfast, and parents loved them because they used what was already in the fridge. Apples were easy to keep on hand. Batter came together fast, and the whole thing cost next to nothing. Some folks dusted them with powdered sugar, others kept it plain, but either way, it was a breakfast that disappeared fast. These showed up everywhere, from rural farmhouses to suburban kitchens, quietly filling plates long before frozen waffles and toaster pastries took over. It is one of those breakfasts you do not hear about anymore. But back then, it was a reliable way to start the day. Cheddar grits with butter were the Southern kitchen's answer to rushed mornings when everyone still needed something hot and filling. Quick grits, a little butter, a handful of shredded cheese, and breakfast was done before you even finished your first cup of coffee. It was the kind of meal found in tattered cookbooks, handed down from grandmothers who knew how to stretch a pantry without cutting corners on comfort. These grits were creamy, cheesy, and surprisingly satisfying for something that took less than 10 minutes to whip up. You did not need fancy groceries or a stocked fridge, just the basics. It kept bellies full through school days, work shifts, or long hours in the fields. For a lot of folks, this was breakfast you ate standing up, spoon in hand, on your way out the door. Simple, cheap, and quietly comforting. Grits have stuck around in fancier forms, but this quick, everyday version has slipped through the cracks of modern cooking. Peanut butter and banana on toast was not just a breakfast. It was a survival trick hidden in government pamphlets and school lunch guides from decades past. You toasted a slice of bread, slathered on peanut butter, and sliced up a banana right on top. It sounds basic now, but during hard times this was protein, potassium, and energy in one affordable package. Families loved it because it was cheap, quick, and used things every pantry had on hand. The United States Department of Agriculture even recommended it for busy families when money was tight but mornings were busier. Sometimes folks sprinkled sugar or honey over it. Other times they kept it plain. Either way, it filled your belly fast and kept you going. It never made the glossy magazine spreads, but it was reliable, frugal, and good enough to get a generation out the door. These days, breakfasts come frozen or boxed, but back then, a piece of toast and a banana could carry you through the morning. Cinnamon toast with broiler crisp was one of those forgotten 10-minute breakfasts that once felt fancy, even though it came straight from the bread box. You would take a slice of white bread, butter it generously, sprinkle it with sugar and cinnamon, and slide it under the broiler until the top bubbled and crisped. That was it. No pancake mix, no waffle irons, just the broiler and a little patience. Kids loved it because it felt like dessert. Parents loved it because it was fast, and everyone loved it because it used pantry staples. During the Great Depression and even into the 70s, families relied on simple breakfasts like this to stretch groceries without giving up flavor. The sugar caramelized on top, the bread toasted just enough, and suddenly plain breakfast felt like a treat. You could find versions of it in old community cookbooks, school recipe cards, even homemaker magazines. Somewhere along the way, it disappeared under the weight of frozen waffles and cereal boxes. Egg in a hole was the breakfast trick every old cookbook seemed to know. Simple enough to pull off in under 10 minutes, but special enough to feel fun. You would cut a hole in the center of a slice of bread, toss it in a buttered skillet, and crack an egg right into the gap. Toasted bread, fried egg, breakfast done, fast and filling with barely any cleanup. It showed up in kitchens from the 1930s through the 70s, always tucked between other quick, comforting recipes. Some folks called it toad in the hole, others sunshine toast, but it was always the same idea, a no-fuss breakfast for busy mornings. It used cheap ingredients most families already had and turned them into something that actually made the morning feel bearable. Kids loved it for the novelty, parents loved it for the speed, and nobody complained when breakfast showed up looking fun for once. It is one of those meals that quietly kept mornings moving, long before breakfast sandwiches and drive-through lines took over. Molasses milk with soda crackers. Sounds strange now, but for rural families and Depression-era kitchens, it was a fast, practical breakfast when the fridge was nearly bare. You would warm up some milk, stir in molasses for sweetness, and crumble soda crackers right on top. That was it. It was not fancy, but it filled you up, gave you a little energy, and made use of things that lasted forever in the pantry. Molasses was cheaper than sugar and packed with nutrients. Soda crackers were everywhere, and milk, fresh or canned, was always a breakfast staple. Old farm cookbooks, church recipe cards, and rural homemaker guides all had versions of this tucked inside, passed around by folks who knew how to stretch the simplest ingredients. It was humble, filling, and comforting in its own odd way. These days, it is almost unheard of, replaced by granola bars and cereal bowls. But back then, this quiet little breakfast got people through hard mornings with nothing but warm milk and a little ingenuity. Wheat germ and yogurt bowls were the health kick of the 1970s that snuck their way into forgotten cookbooks and quick breakfast guides. You would scoop some plain yogurt into a bowl, toss on a spoonful of wheat germ, maybe drizzle honey or sprinkle nuts if you had them, and breakfast was done in minutes. It was quick, packed with protein, and felt ahead of its time back when most breakfasts were still sugar-heavy cereals or toast. The health-conscious crowd loved it because it kept you full. Parents liked it because it was easy. And even the kids got on board, mostly because the yogurt cut through the plain, nutty taste of wheat germ. These bowls were everywhere in the 70s, showing up in homemaker magazines, diet guides, and those community cookbooks with spiral bindings. But like a lot of forgotten breakfasts, they slipped away when trends shifted. Now it is all smoothie bowls and protein shakes. Oatmeal with brown sugar and cream was about as classic as breakfast could get. Quick oats simmered on the stove, topped with a spoonful of brown sugar and a splash of canned milk. It was ready in 10 minutes flat, cheap to make, and warm enough to shake off the worst winter mornings. Families across America leaned on this breakfast when budgets were tight, but everyone still needed something filling to start the day. Quick oats cooked faster than traditional oats, brown sugar gave just enough sweetness, and canned milk made the whole thing creamy even if fresh milk was hard to come by. It showed up in school lunch guides, frugal homemaker magazines, and those old cookbooks buried at the back of every kitchen drawer. For a lot of folks, this was not a special occasion breakfast. It was the daily routine, quiet, dependable, and gone in under 10 minutes. Funny how something so ordinary could disappear so completely, replaced by instant packets and flashy coffee shop menus. Cottage cheese on toast with pineapple rings was the kind of retro breakfast you would find tucked inside those glossy 1970s women's magazines, always advertised as light, quick, and just fancy enough to feel like you tried. You would toast a slice of bread, scoop on some cottage cheese, and crown the whole thing with a pineapple ring straight from the can. It sounds odd now, but back then it was practical, filling, and passed off as health food. Sweet, salty, creamy, and done in under 10 minutes. Perfect for busy mornings or when groceries were running low. Housewives loved it for its simplicity, and teenagers liked it for being something different than plain old toast. You could find versions of this popping up at brunch tables, church socials, or just in quiet kitchens trying to stretch a meal. Somewhere along the way, it disappeared under the weight of new diet trends and breakfast bars, but at the time, it was a fast, no-fuss meal that worked. Cream cheese and jelly sandwiches were one of those quiet kitchen tricks passed down from old homemaker guides, perfect for rushed mornings when the fridge looked bare, but breakfast still had to happen. You would take soft white bread, spread on a swipe of cream cheese, and finish it off with grape jelly or whatever jam was on hand. That was it. Served cold or lightly toasted, it was fast, sweet, and filling enough to count. For a lot of families, this sandwich was a saving grace on mornings when eggs were too expensive and cereal boxes were empty. Cream cheese made it creamy, the jelly brought the sweetness, and together they turned plain bread into something that actually stuck with you through the morning. You could find versions of this recipe in old community cookbooks, lunchbox ideas, and school pamphlets reminding parents how to keep breakfast simple. Somewhere along the way, it got pushed aside by granola bars and frozen breakfast sandwiches, but back then, it was a 10-minute meal that worked every time. Funny how those easy, no-fuss breakfasts slipped through the cracks. Tomato juice and a toasted English muffin was the stripped-down breakfast of every vintage weight loss guide and old cookbook trying to keep mornings fast, efficient, and low-calorie. You would pour a glass of chilled tomato juice, toast an English muffin, maybe spread a little butter if the diet allowed, and that was breakfast. It was basic, practical, and done in under 10 minutes. Back then, this was advertised as a smart start to the day, simple, savory, and filling without much effort. Housewives, office workers, and even students were told this meal would keep you going without weighing you down. It showed up everywhere from hospital diet plans to homemaker magazines, quietly filling bellies long before protein shakes and pre-packed bars took over. The tomato juice gave a little bite, the English muffin brought warmth, and together they were enough to start the day when time and groceries were tight. It is one of those breakfasts nobody brags about now, but it quietly got families through busy mornings without all the bells and whistles. Poached egg. Overstewed tomatoes was the kind of savory breakfast you would only find in old church cookbooks or handwritten recipe cards from a neighbor down the street. It was practical, filling, and ready in under 10 minutes, even if it sounded a little fancy. You would poach an egg, ladle some stewed tomatoes onto a plate, and serve it all with day-old biscuits or plain toast. The tomatoes were sweet and tangy, the egg added protein, and together they made breakfast that actually stuck with you through the morning. Families leaned on meals like this when money was tight and groceries were limited, especially during the Great Depression or lean years after the war. You did not need much: canned tomatoes, an egg, maybe some stale bread, and suddenly breakfast felt warm, filling, and just a little different than the usual toast. These meals disappeared as boxed cereals and frozen breakfasts took over, but back then it was one of the quiet ways people got through the morning with what little they had. Cold rice with milk and sugar was the ultimate make-do breakfast pulled from the back pages of old community cookbooks and family kitchen tables when leftovers were all that stood between you and an empty stomach. You would take leftover rice, pour cold milk over it, Sprinkle a little sugar or cinnamon if you had it, and breakfast was done in under 10 minutes. It sounds plain now, but back then, it was practical, frugal, and good enough to keep you going. Farmers, factory workers, and school kids all started the day with simple meals like this when groceries ran low, but mornings never slowed down. Cold rice was easy to stretch, milk made it creamy, and sugar turned it into something that actually felt like breakfast. Some families tossed in raisins or fruit if they had extra, but most kept it plain and quick. You will not find this breakfast on menus today, but back then it quietly kept families fed with nothing but leftovers and a little kitchen ingenuity. Funny how the simplest meals fade away. Peanut butter and honey milkshakes were the quick breakfast booster you would find in every 1960s teen handbook or homemaker guide promising energy in minutes. You would toss peanut butter, milk, and honey into a blender, give it a good mix, and breakfast was done before you could even finish your coffee. It sounds simple now, but back then it was practical, filling, and surprisingly satisfying. Parents loved it because it was affordable and kept teenagers full, and teenagers loved it because it tasted like dessert for breakfast. Some folks added ice or fruit if they had extra, but the basic recipe stayed the same. Peanut butter for protein, honey for sweetness, and milk to bring it all together. It showed up in old cookbooks, school lunch suggestions, and quick breakfast guides long before protein shakes and energy drinks filled grocery aisles. Somewhere along the way, it disappeared under the weight of modern trends, but back then, it was the kind of breakfast that quietly got families through rushed mornings with nothing but pantry staples and a blender. Quick cornmeal. Mush was one of those Depression-era breakfasts that showed up in every rural cookbook and farmhouse kitchen when groceries ran low, but mornings still demanded something hot and filling. You would stir cornmeal into boiling water, cook it down to a thick, creamy consistency, and top it with butter, syrup, or even just a pinch of salt. Breakfast was done in 10 minutes flat, and somehow it stuck with you for hours. Families loved it because cornmeal was cheap, easy to store, and stretched into a satisfying meal without much effort. Some folks called it polenta, others called it mush, but it always worked the same: practical, no fuss, and surprisingly comforting. It filled bellies through winters, long work days, and school mornings when cereal was not an option. You could find versions of this recipe in old homemaker magazines, church fundraisers, and even government pamphlets reminding families how to get by with less. It is one of those breakfasts that quietly disappeared, replaced by boxed mixes and quick-fix meals. But back then, it kept people going. Canned peach halves with cottage cheese was the quiet, no-cook breakfast that kept dieters, seniors, and busy families fed when time and groceries were both running low. You would grab a can of peach halves, spoon some cottage cheese in the center, and breakfast was done in under 10 minutes. Sweet, creamy, and filling enough to count, it showed up in weight loss guides, homemaker magazines, and community cookbooks promising simple, affordable meals. Parents loved it because it was fast and required no stove, and older folks leaned on it when cooking felt like too much work. It might sound odd now, but back then, canned fruit and cottage cheese were pantry staples that stretched far and kept mornings moving. Some versions added a drizzle of honey or chopped nuts, but most kept it plain, quick, and practical. It is one of those breakfasts that slipped away as frozen meals and grab-and-go options took over, but back then, it was quietly keeping families fed with nothing but a can opener and a spoon. Maple syrup toast with warmed butter was the farmhouse kitchen's answer to rushed mornings when breakfast still needed to feel comforting, even if the fridge was nearly bare. You would toast a slice of bread, slather on warm butter, and drizzle real maple syrup over the top. That was it. Sweet, buttery, and ready in under 10 minutes. Families loved it because it was practical, made from pantry staples, and good enough to carry you through a long morning of chores, school, or factory work. Some folks added cinnamon, others kept it plain, but either way, it turned toast into something that felt a little indulgent. You could find versions of this in old rural cookbooks, passed down through generations of families who knew how to stretch groceries without cutting corners on comfort. Somewhere along the way, breakfasts like this disappeared under the weight of boxed cereals and fast food menus, But back then, it was one of those quiet meals that actually made mornings bearable. Funny how something so simple could be so easy to forget. Crispy rice cereal with sliced banana and evaporated milk was one of those fast, forgotten breakfasts straight out of government-issued recipe guides and frugal homemaker magazines from decades past. You would pour a bowl of crispy rice cereal, slice a banana over the top, and finish it with canned evaporated milk instead of fresh milk. Breakfast was done in under 10 minutes. Ready before the school bus pulled up or the factory whistle blew, it was practical, affordable, and quietly comforting in its own way. Families leaned on breakfasts like this when groceries ran tight, but everyone still needed something filling to start the day. Evaporated milk was shelf-stable, bananas stretched a meal, and cereal brought the crunch. You will not find this version on menus today, but back then, it was one of those small tricks that kept mornings moving without much fuss. Somehow, even the humblest breakfasts had a way of sticking with you, until they disappeared. Leftover biscuit with syrup or gravy drizzle was one of those Depression-era breakfasts that made sure nothing ever went to waste. You would take yesterday's biscuit, stale or not, reheat it, and pour canned gravy or a drizzle of syrup over the top. Suddenly, leftovers became breakfast in under 10 minutes. Families leaned on meals like this when the cupboards were bare and payday felt a long way off. It was not fancy, but it filled your belly and kept mornings moving. Syrup sweetened things up, gravy made it savory, and both stretched the little bit of food you had into something satisfying. Farmhouses, boarding houses, even factory kitchens knew this trick by heart. You could find it tucked away in old homemaker guides and church recipe swaps, quietly keeping people fed when groceries were scarce. Some meals disappeared quietly, but back then, this one carried families through lean times with nothing but yesterday's bread and a little creativity. Baked bean toast was the quick, savory breakfast that filled countless plates across New England when mornings were rushed, but you still needed something hot and satisfying. You would toast a slice of bread, spoon on canned baked beans, maybe top it with cheese or butter, and slide it under the broiler. Breakfast was done in under 10 minutes, hearty enough to carry you through a long day. Families loved it because it was affordable, practical, and good enough to stretch one can of beans into a meal for the whole house. Old cookbooks, factory lunch guides, and frugal homemaker magazines all praised this trick for making mornings easy without giving up flavor. Some folks added mustard or hot sauce, others kept it plain, but either way, it was the kind of breakfast that quietly filled bellies when nothing else seemed to last. These days, it barely gets a mention, but back then, baked bean toast was one of those small comforts that made hard mornings feel bearable. Soft-boiled egg with buttered soldiers was the breakfast shortcut every British American household swore by when time was tight, but comfort still mattered. You would soft-boil an egg, slice toast into thin strips called soldiers, and dip them right into the runny yolk. Breakfast done in under 10 minutes, warm, filling, and good enough to start even the busiest day. It was simple, practical, and everywhere in old cookbooks that cared more about frugality than fancy plating. Families leaned on meals like this when groceries ran low, but everyone still needed something protein-packed and fast. Kids loved it for the dipping, parents loved it for the speed, and it quietly filled countless tables from the 1930s through the 70s. Somewhere along the way, soft-boiled eggs and buttered soldiers disappeared under frozen waffles and drive-through breakfasts. But back then, it was one of those small, satisfying meals that made mornings a little easier. Quick cheese grits with fried egg was the Southern shortcut breakfast that filled diners and home kitchens when mornings were short, but you still needed something hot and hearty. You would cook instant grits, stir in shredded cheese, fry an egg on the side, and layer it all in a bowl. Breakfast was done in under 10 minutes, but somehow it stuck with you all morning long. Families loved it because grits stretched far, eggs were easy to get, and a little cheese turned the whole thing creamy and filling. Southern diners kept it on the menu for quick weekday breakfasts, but this one lived quietly in home kitchens too. Practical, simple, and comforting. You could find versions of it scribbled in old cookbooks, tucked between biscuit recipes and gravy tricks, passed down by folks who knew how to make breakfast work without much fuss. Somewhere along the way, cheese grits and eggs faded under the pressure of new trends. But back then, this breakfast quietly carried people through long days. Jelly roll-ups on white bread were the quick breakfast treat every kid from the 1950s to the 70s knew by heart. You would flatten a slice of white bread, spread on a little jam, roll it up tight, and slice it into pinwheels. Breakfast was done in under 10 minutes, fun to eat, and easy enough that even kids could make their own. Families leaned on meals like this when mornings were rushed, but you still needed something sweet to start the day. It was a trick you would find in lunchbox guides, homemaker columns, and those old spiral-bound cookbooks hiding in every kitchen drawer. Some folks added peanut butter, others kept it plain with jelly. But either way, it turned bread and jam into a quick, cheerful breakfast that actually stuck with you. Somewhere along the way, roll-ups disappeared under cereal boxes and toaster pastries. But back then, it was one of those small, forgotten meals that made mornings just a little brighter. Banana and wheat germ smoothies were the forgotten health food breakfast from the 1970s, back when nutrition guides promised energy in 10 minutes or less. You would blend a banana with milk, add a spoon of wheat germ, and maybe toss in honey if you had it. That was breakfast, quick, filling, and just trendy enough to feel like you were ahead of the curve. Parents loved it for being affordable, teens liked it for the simplicity, and health fads leaned hard on it as a protein-packed, no-fuss morning meal. It showed up in old diet books, homemaker columns, and those paper recipe handouts at grocery stores. Wheat germ was the health food of its time, promising fiber and nutrients without all the heavy cooking. Smoothies were new enough to feel exciting but easy enough to show up in every busy household. Somewhere along the way, this breakfast got lost behind flashy protein powders and complicated smoothie bowls, but back then, it quietly kept families full with nothing but fruit, milk, and a blender. Raisin bran with warm milk and butter was the winter breakfast trick every frugal family knew when mornings were freezing, but there was still work to be done. You would pour bran flakes into a bowl, warm some milk on the stove, add a small scoop of butter, and pour it all over the cereal. Breakfast done in 10 minutes flat, warm, creamy, and filling enough to carry you through the morning. Families leaned on meals like this when groceries ran tight, but everyone still needed something hot and practical to start the day. It was sweet from the raisins, buttery from the milk, and surprisingly comforting for something so simple. You could find versions of this breakfast in old community cookbooks, homemaker guides, and those faded recipe cards tucked in kitchen drawers. Some folks sprinkled sugar, others added cinnamon, but it always came back to the same quiet goal. Stretch a little food as far as you could and start the day with something warm. Funny how those simple breakfasts disappear when new trends roll in. Applesauce toast with nutmeg was the frugal breakfast tucked inside every homemaker column and Depression-era guide when groceries ran low but mornings kept coming. You would toast a slice of bread, smear it with applesauce, sprinkle a little nutmeg on top, and breakfast was done in under 10 minutes. It was practical, filling, and sweet enough to feel comforting when everything else felt stretched thin. Families leaned on meals like this when fruit was scarce, budgets were tight, and creativity had to carry the kitchen. Applesauce lasted longer than fresh fruit, nutmeg added warmth, and toast turned it all into a quick meal that actually filled you up. It was not fancy, but it worked, and you could find it everywhere from farm kitchens to city apartments. Some folks added butter, others kept it plain, but either way, it was one of those quiet little breakfasts that made hard mornings feel a little easier. These days, applesauce toast barely gets a mention, but back then it quietly carried families through. Egg salad on white bread, open-faced, was the speedy breakfast that showed up in every 1960s lunchroom and kitchen guide when mornings were short but something filling still needed to hit the table. You would mash pre-boiled eggs with mayo, salt, and pepper, spread it on white bread, and serve it open-faced. That was breakfast, ready in under 10 minutes, practical, affordable, and good enough to carry you through the day. Families leaned on meals like this when groceries were limited, but eggs stretched far and filled hungry bellies. It was not fancy, but it was reliable, tucked into community cookbooks and school lunch guides that promised quick, no-fuss meals. Some folks added pickles or herbs, others kept it plain, but either way, it turned leftover eggs into something that worked fast. These days, it is rare to see egg salad show up outside of potlucks or picnics, but back then, it was a small, simple breakfast that actually stuck with you. Cottage cheese with canned fruit cocktail was the speedy, no-cook breakfast that lived in every 1970s diet book and homemaker guide, promising light meals that took barely any effort. You would scoop cottage cheese onto a plate, pour canned fruit cocktail over the top, and breakfast was done in under 10 minutes. Sweet, creamy, and surprisingly filling, it worked when mornings were busy, but everyone still needed something practical to eat. Families leaned on meals like this when groceries were tight, and dieters swore by it for being low effort and satisfying enough to skip the fancy recipes. It was a trick you could find tucked inside women's magazines, diet plans, and community cookbooks trying to stretch fruit and dairy into a real meal. Some folks added nuts or honey, others kept it plain. But either way, it quietly filled countless tables before frozen meals and boxed breakfasts took over. Funny how those quick, reliable meals slipped away. Puffed rice cereal was shot from guns. That was not a joke. That was the actual slogan. And if that sounds dramatic, it is because cereal marketing in the mid-20th century was off the rails. You would open a tall tin can, yes, a literal metal can of cereal, and pour out a mound of puffed air disguised as breakfast. Puffed rice was bland, had the texture of packing peanuts, and got soggy 5 seconds after milk hit it. But kids ate it by the bowlful. Why? Because the name sounded dangerous and the commercials were wild. There was something thrilling about knowing your cereal had been blasted into existence with air cannons and then sealed in a tin like military rations. Plus, it made a great sound when it hit the bowl. The taste? Forgettable. But in a time when breakfast had to stretch and shelf life mattered more than flavor, puffed rice did its job. You could eat it dry, throw some sugar on top, or mix it with something else entirely. And for families who grew up on wartime habits and post-war marketing, it was a compromise that stuck around. But not everything from that era was dry or crunchy. Some breakfasts were warm, brown, and stirred in circles. Scrapple, a traditional Pennsylvania Dutch dish, dates back to the 17th century. It's a savory breakfast item made from pork scraps and cornmeal, formed into a loaf and fried. The dish uses specific animal parts like pork liver, heart, and trimmings, combined with cornmeal and spices, creating a unique flavor profile. Scrapple is usually fried and garnished with maple syrup or ketchup, making it versatile. Scrapple is considered one of the earliest forms of American comfort food, as it was created by German immigrants who settled in Pennsylvania. It's popular for its rich flavor and association with Pennsylvania Dutch culture. It became a regional specialty due to its resourcefulness and distinctive taste. Scrapple holds cultural significance as a testament to frugality and tradition, often served with eggs or toast. Introduced in 1963, Sunny Delight positioned itself as a healthier alternative to sodas by offering a vitamin-enriched, citrus-flavored beverage that quickly captured the market's attention. Its bright color and sweet taste made it a hit among children, while its marketing campaigns emphasized a fun and active lifestyle, integrating Sunny D into scenes of youthful energy and outdoor activities. Despite its success, the brand encountered criticism for its high sugar content and low percentage of real juice, prompting several reformulations to increase authenticity and align with healthier consumer preferences. These changes allowed Sunny D to update its image and product offerings to better meet the expectations of modern consumers looking for healthier drink options. Speaking of eggs, the Burger King enormous omelet sandwich came out around 2005 and rocked breakfast menus just as much as a good McDonald's bagel. A behemoth in both size and calories, this drew so much attention on social media and fans went in droves excited to try out the new mouth-watering monstrosity. For about $3.29, you could have yourself a full-course breakfast meal, and if you do not trust us, then no worries. The numbers speak for themselves, and Burger King saw a 20% hike in breakfast sales that left the bigwigs speechless. We guess you can never really go wrong with eggs and bread, which may just be the food equivalent of man's best friend. Buttered saltine crackers with tea was not a snack. It was survival disguised as sophistication. You would take plain saltines, smear a bit of butter, or margarine if that is all you had, and pair it with a weak cup of tea. That was breakfast. No jam, no eggs, no sides, just crunch and steam. And somehow it worked. This was common in households where the bread ran out early and payday was still a few days away. But it did not feel like scraping the bottom. It felt intentional. A little quiet moment, sitting by the window with a tin of crackers and a chipped teacup. Sometimes, if you were lucky, the butter was soft. Other times it would tear the cracker in half and you would eat it in pieces. It was humble, yes, but not pitiful. That is the thing about old-school breakfasts. They stretched what little you had and made it count. Every bite was a memory. Every sip of lukewarm tea was a tiny reset button for the day ahead. But crackers were just the start. Some mornings, the real magic happened when last night's cornmeal was fried into gold. The Bologna and Egg breakfast sandwich is a straightforward and satisfying dish that has been enjoyed since the mid-20th century. This dish combines fried bologna, a cooked egg, and cheese on a soft roll or bread. Fried bologna sandwiches have been a staple in working-class American households since the early 20th century, providing a hearty and affordable meal option. The bologna is typically prepared by frying it until it develops a crispy edge, while the egg is cooked to preference, often sunny side up or over easy. The sandwich is usually served on a soft roll or white bread, complementing the savory fillings. In 2019, a food truck in Nashville, Tennessee, gained attention for serving gourmet versions of the classic bologna and egg sandwich, elevating it to a trendy brunch item. Curious how Jiffy Pop Pancakes made morning meals a breeze with their just add water mix during the hectic 70s. This convenience resonated deeply with the 1970s households, streamlining the morning routine remarkably. The product's simplicity allowed anyone to quickly whip up pancakes, making it a popular choice among families with busy schedules. Jiffy Pop's marketing cleverly focused on these time-saving aspects, often showcasing family breakfasts that were both delicious and hassle-free. The mix was versatile, catering to various taste preferences with different flavors. While Jiffy Pop Pancakes enjoyed popularity due to their convenience and taste, the evolving breakfast market eventually led to reduced visibility and presence, as newer breakfast options continued to diversify. The McDonald's steak, egg, and cheese bagel came out around the same time as its big breakfast, and was often something families ordered together when they ate out. The incredible mix of egg and cheese with really flavorful steak bits into a bagel was something people in the States could not get enough of. It was especially popular with the older crowd, which is funny because the company initially thought it would be more popular with the younger crowd. Back then, you could get this bagel for $1.25, which was a reasonable steal and a perfect add-on at the time. Breakfast menus around the nation had a hard time competing with the steak, egg, and cheese bagel. And despite it being discontinued, it is an 80s icon we really want back. Leftover liver and onions for breakfast is the kind of thing that instantly tells you what generation someone is from. To many, it sounds like a punishment. To others, it was normal. Liver was cheap, nutritious, and widely available. Three things that mattered way more than taste. It came sliced, fried, and smothered in onions to soften both the texture and the blow. You might have had it for dinner the night before, and if there were leftovers, guess what was reheated in the skillet first thing in the morning? The smell alone was enough to clear a room. Metallic, meaty, and unmistakably intense. But it stuck to your ribs, and that was what mattered. Especially for working-class families or folks still shaking off Depression-era habits, liver and onions represented a kind of no-nonsense nourishment. And if you doused it in Worcestershire sauce or ate it with toast, you could almost convince yourself it was good. Almost. But if you ever woke up to that smell and thought, oh good, there's some left, then yes, you might be old. And if your breakfast was not liver, It might have come from the cold side of the fridge, swimming in syrupy nostalgia. Costing nothing but $1 and 3 minutes of your time as the service worker assembled it, Taco Bell's mini skillet bowls were an amazing breakfast and lunch that people adored picking up. Why was it so good for takeout especially, and not a meal you would typically sit down and have? Because it was super quick in all regards, the preparation and the consumption. A quick affair to get you all readied up on your way to work or school, and it was always a sunny plus side that it left you with enough lunch money for later. In the corporate world, you really need cash on hand at all times for those midday cravings, and that is a part of why fast food culture and restaurants got so popular in the first place. Since the famous old Bell decided to take down the mini skillet bowls from their already stellar menu, people have found quick substitutes and ways around it. German pancakes, also known as Dutch babies, are a unique breakfast dish that originated in the early 20th century. These pancakes are often topped with powdered sugar or fruit. The ingredients for German pancakes include eggs, flour, milk, and sugar, creating a batter that is poured into a hot skillet and baked in the oven. The key ingredient that gives German pancakes their distinct puffiness is eggs, which cause the batter to rise dramatically while baking. These pancakes are typically served with a squeeze of lemon and a dusting of powdered sugar, enhancing their delicate flavor. In the 1960s, Dutch babies gained popularity in California, thanks to Sunset magazine featuring the recipe in their publication. German pancakes are also commonly referred to as Dutch babies, a name popularized in the United States. Sardines on toast. That is it. That was the breakfast. A few oily, salty fish laid out over a slice of dry toast, sometimes with mustard, sometimes with nothing at all. This was peak efficiency. Sardines came in little tins with pull tabs and olive oil, and once opened, there was no going back. You either learned to love them, or you left the room. But in many households, especially immigrant or coastal communities, sardines were normal. They were rich in protein, did not require refrigeration, and could be eaten cold. They slid out of the can like they were daring you to try them, and once you did, you either never looked back or never forgave your parents. The smell alone would hang in the kitchen like a stubborn ghost, and yet somehow they kept showing up on toast. Bonus points if you smashed them onto toast with a fork and added some black pepper or a squeeze of lemon. That was the deluxe version. For others, it was just fish and bread, plain and honest. Kids would gag. Grandparents would smile. And somewhere in the middle, someone would quietly eat their sardines and be grateful they were not powdered eggs again. It was not about flavor. It was about function. And if that sound of the tin peeling open still triggers memories, you know exactly what kind of breakfast we are talking about. But not every vintage morning started with toast and fish. Some of them started with hot soda, literally. Kougall Spread on toast was a quirky and delightful dish first created in the early 1970s. The dish consists of Kougall, a flavored peanut butter spread slathered on toast. Kougall came in various unique flavors like chocolate, vanilla, cinnamon, and banana, making it a playful alternative to regular peanut butter. The spread, manufactured by Kraft, became popular due to its unique and sweet flavors, which appealed to children and adults alike. The most popular flavor of Kougall Spread was chocolate, which was often enjoyed as a sweet breakfast treat or snack. Kougall was discontinued in the late 1970s due to declining sales. Blast off with Tang. Launched by General Foods in 1959, this vibrant drink rocketed into popularity by becoming the beverage of choice for astronauts during the 1960s space race. This stellar connection provided Tang with an unbeatable marketing boost, aligning it with innovation and adventure. With a lineup of flavors like orange, grape, and tropical punch, orange soared as the fan favorite, beloved for its vivid color and zesty taste. Tang's ads frequently featured space missions, solidifying its image as the futuristic drink of choice. Originally designed as a vitamin-enriched drink for convenience, Tang later shifted its marketing towards health-focused themes to keep up with changing consumer preferences about natural ingredients and sugar content. McDonald's is a name anyone can recognize and still holds up today just as much as before, but do you remember when they were serving the iconic Big Breakfast at stores? McDonald's best and most iconic starter was probably their Big Breakfast, which literally everybody can remember having. This dish was truly a star on the 70s and 80s menus way before anybody ever even thought of a McMuffin. Mostly popular amongst teenagers working part-time, and McDonald's staff would enjoy a big breakfast on early work days. It was not just them, trust us. 8-year-olds to 35-year-olds all enjoyed getting soft, delicious scrambled eggs served with the fluffiest muffins you could get under $1. Sounds like a pretty good deal, right? No wonder it performed as well as it did, even if it got discontinued in 2002 in favor of hot dogs and burgers. Cornbread in buttermilk in a glass. No plate, no fork, just crumble, pour, and drink. Or scoop it with a spoon, depending on your texture tolerance. This was rural breakfast science at its finest, a southern tradition that turned dry, leftover cornbread into something hearty, tangy, and oddly refreshing. The cornbread, ideally a bit stale, would be broken into chunks and tossed into a tall glass. Then came the buttermilk, thick, sour, and ice-cold. It was a weird blend of creamy, sour, and gritty, but to those who grew up on it, it was comfort in a cup. It filled you up, cooled you down, and somehow made you feel like you were doing something right. Some people added salt, others stirred in sugar. But most just left it as is, letting the bread absorb the buttermilk until it became a chunky, tangy porridge. It sounds bizarre until you try it. And if you grew up in a house where cornbread was made in cast iron and buttermilk was always in the fridge, this dish was second nature. It was not glamorous, but it was filling and cheap. It got you through the day and made use of every crumb. If you ever watched someone eat this and thought, maybe, you are not alone. And if you actually liked it, then welcome to the secret club. But if soggy bread drinks are not your thing, how about cereal with a twist only the brave attempted? Toaster strudel, a sweet and convenient breakfast treat, first appeared in the early 1980s. This quick delight consists of flaky pastry filled with fruit or cream, toasted and topped with sweet vanilla glaze. Varieties like chocolate, cinnamon, and seasonal fruit keep it exciting. The type of icing traditionally used for toaster strudel is a sweet vanilla glaze, which adds a touch of indulgence to the crispy pastry. The treat became popular when it was embraced as an easy breakfast option by the Pillsbury Company. The brand's iconic Little Chef character helped promote toaster strudel as a fun and kid-friendly breakfast option. Toaster strudel was inspired by traditional Austrian pastries like Apfelstrudel, which were popularized in the United States by European immigrants in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Toaster strudel influenced breakfast trends, offering a quick and delicious option for busy mornings. Creamed eggs on toast involves gently chopped hard-boiled eggs in a creamy sauce, often seasoned with herbs and spices, served over toasted bread. This dish, known for its comforting qualities and simple preparation, became a favored breakfast and light meal option, aligning with American preferences for hearty, straightforward dishes. The versatility in seasoning allowed for a variety of flavors, making it a popular choice in both diners and home kitchens. The dish's rich, creamy texture combined with the ease of preparation made it a reliable choice for a satisfying meal, fitting well into the meal routines of many seeking both comfort and simplicity in their culinary choices. A mini skillet bowl sounds healthy enough, right? That was not the only fast food name that would take a step in a more greener direction, as McDonald's came out with their fruit and yogurt parfait sometime after their big breakfast, initially being a sweet cup you could get for just $1. It was also a wonderful breakfast if you were trying for a healthier lifestyle or were one of those early morning run people. Maybe you had the gym in the afternoon and were keener on lighter breakfasts, or maybe you just want to get your fruit game up. Either way, the parfait sold in waves and made sales go high for an item that was irregular from the rest of the menu. Unfortunately, it was something they discontinued during the pandemic to make service quicker for workers because everyone prioritized minimizing contact back then. If you ever ate pie while standing in front of the fridge with a spoon and a guilty conscience, then welcome home. But not every shortcut was sweet. Some were warm, brown, and brewed from desperation. Postum was not coffee, it just looked like it was. For many families, it was the hot beverage of choice, especially when actual coffee was too expensive or frowned upon for kids. Made from roasted grains and molasses, postum was marketed as the wholesome, caffeine-free alternative. And somehow people bought into that. You would stir a spoonful into hot water and try to convince yourself it tasted like something grown-ups would drink. It had this deep, earthy flavor that hovered somewhere between toasted bread and boiled pencil shavings. Not terrible, just different. And when paired with a piece of dry toast, it became a breakfast that felt oddly noble. You were not indulging. You were starting the day with restraint. Postum was the drink of war years, depression years, and anyone trying to avoid caffeine jitters. It was the beverage equivalent of "we make do." And if you sipped it from a chipped mug while flipping through the newspaper or stared out the window while steam fogged your glasses, then you get it. That kind of quiet breakfast was not rare. It was routine. But when even bread was running low, folks had to get creative with what they spread, or did not spread, on top. Buttered grits, a Southern staple, originated in colonial America. This simple yet beloved dish is usually served as a side or base for other toppings. Made from ground corn, grits are cooked with water or milk until creamy, then butter is added for richness. The dish is synonymous with Southern cuisine, particularly in Charleston, South Carolina, known for its love of grits. Grits are remembered for their comforting texture and versatility, which made them a popular breakfast dish in the 1970s. Traditional or unusual toppings like cheese, shrimp, or gravy enhance the dish. The dish's cultural significance lies in its association with Southern hospitality and hearty breakfasts. In some Southern states, grits are even considered a delicacy and are often served at special occasions and celebrations. Post-fortified oat flakes were marketed as a health-oriented breakfast option, enriched with vitamins and minerals to appeal to health-conscious consumers. Introduced by Post cereals, they were promoted for their benefits like improved heart health and additional fiber, aligning with the increasing health trends of the mid-20th century. The oat flakes stood out for their nutritional value and were marketed through various campaigns emphasizing their health benefits. These flakes were known for their hearty texture, which provided a fulfilling start to the day, making them a favored choice for those looking to maintain a healthy diet. The focus on health and nutrition helped establish post-fortified oat flakes as a reliable breakfast option during their time on the market. Frosted Flakes with half and half was the breakfast of champions if your goal was to feel full until dinner. This was not your average milk and cereal situation. This was decadence disguised as routine. You would pour yourself a big bowl of Frosted Flakes, already sweet enough to power a third grader through gym class, and then drown it in half and half. Not milk, not cream, that luxurious middle ground where things got dangerously rich. The flakes would float, slowly losing their crunch as the thick liquid coated every surface. The first few bites felt like dessert, but by the bottom of the bowl, you were rethinking your life choices. Still, you knew you would do it again the next morning because it was just that good. First bite? Heavenly? Fifth bite? Questionable. But the sugar and fat combo made it weirdly addictive. It was the kind of breakfast that whispered, "You will regret this." But you did it anyway. And for many families, this was just how cereal was served, especially when whole milk was out and half was all you had left from Sunday dinner. It was resourceful. It was a little rebellious, and if you ever stood at the counter eating it straight from the mixing bowl while someone yelled at you to get ready for school, then congratulations. You lived. But cereal was not the only leftover fusion people created in the morning. Some families went full spaghetti sandwich. Hamburger hash, a hearty and comforting dish, became popular in the mid-20th century. It's a breakfast favorite made with ground beef, potatoes, and onions sautéed together. Ground chuck is often used for a flavorful base. Hamburger hash is garnished with fresh herbs or served with eggs, adding to its satisfying taste. The dish became popular for its convenience and hearty appeal, especially for families or large groups. Regional variations exist, such as incorporating bell peppers or different meats. In some regions, corned beef hash is a popular variation, using corned beef instead of ground beef. The dish was commonly paired with coffee or juice for breakfast, reflecting America's love for hearty morning meals. For $2.99, Wendy's would introduce the Wendy's Super Bar in 1988, which was an entire buffet that did extremely well with fans. People went in absolutely insane numbers and crowds to take full advantage of what seemed like a deal too good to be true. The kind of maybe when hell freezes over situations you never really imagine yourself actually experiencing. Yet that is exactly what people got in those blessed times. A proper and delicious buffet that did not break the bank. Unfortunately, it was not that good for the company as it got pretty expensive and hard to maintain, so they discontinued it after just a calm decade. Sugar Smacks was not just cereal. It was barely cereal. It was more like candied puffs pretending to be nutritious, and somehow that was enough. If you remember pouring yourself a giant bowl of Sugar Smacks while your parents sat across from you sipping on straight black coffee, welcome to the real breakfast club. The contrast was wild. You had a sugar explosion on one side of the table and bitter rocket fuel on the other. That was the vibe. Adults drank coffee because they were tired. Kids ate sugar cereal because it made the cartoons funnier. And sometimes, if your parents were really running behind, you would take a sip of their coffee out of curiosity and immediately regret it. No cream, no sugar, just punishment in a cup. But you would go back for more anyway, because somehow, the bitterness of the coffee balanced the ridiculous sweetness of the cereal. It made you feel older, like you belonged at the big table. That was the thing about breakfast back then. It was a weird mix of indulgence and grit. And if you remember tearing through a box of Sugar Smacks while sipping burnt diner coffee from your dad's chipped mug, you are not just old, you are vintage. But not every cereal was sugary. Some were practically gravel. Heard about space food sticks? Launched in the early 70s, these snacks promised a taste of astronaut life right on your snack plate. Introduced in the early 1970s, they were marketed as a nutritious option that provided sustained energy, with flavors like peanut butter and chocolate. The novelty of their space-age concept, combined with practical packaging that made them easy to consume on the go, initially drew considerable attention. The connection to NASA and the allure of consuming astronaut food added to their appeal, particularly among children and young adults intrigued by space travel. The innovative approach of space food sticks to combining nutrition with the excitement of space exploration helped them capture a unique niche in the snack market. Ovaltine was for people who wanted hot cocoa, but wound up with vitamins instead. You would scoop the brown powder into a mug, add hot water or milk, and stir, and stir, and stir some more, because it never truly dissolved. You would sip it and still find clumps floating at the top. The taste? Malted, vaguely chocolatey, with a lingering aftertaste of health. But Ovaltine was not just about flavor. It was about promises. The box claimed to make you stronger, smarter, and healthier, all while giving off the vibe of a prescription from your grandma. It was especially popular during the 1940s through the 1960s, when anything that could be fortified with vitamins was instantly approved by parents. And if you were sick, forget it. Ovaltine was coming your way whether you wanted it or not. It was like the soup of the breakfast world, supposedly comforting, vaguely medicinal, and always a little too warm. Kids would pretend to enjoy it, stirring it until the top got cold and the bottom got gritty. And if you ever drank it through a striped straw just to distract yourself, congratulations, you are in the club. But for some families, breakfast was even stranger. It came straight from a can and always smelled like regret. Remember Grape Nuts Flakes? Introduced as a variant of the original Grape Nuts cereal, offered a flakier texture while retaining the nutritional benefits of the original, such as being high in fiber and low in sugar. These flakes appealed to consumers seeking a nutritious yet convenient breakfast option, fitting well into a balanced diet. Known for their crunchy texture, Grape Nuts Flakes were often consumed with milk or yogurt, providing a satisfying meal. The cereal was marketed for its health benefits, which resonated with health-conscious consumers. The distinct texture and robust flavor of grape nuts flakes made them a staple in some homes, favored for their contribution to a healthy lifestyle and their ability to offer a fulfilling start to the day. Kellogg's Product 19 was not just cereal. It was a statement. A beige box with a no-nonsense name, it looked like something you would find in a government ration kit. No cartoon tiger, no marshmallows, just flakes. Vitamin-enriched, iron-packed flakes that promise to do everything except taste good. Product 19 was Kellogg's answer to, well, nutrition. A cereal so serious it could only be marketed to adults, or kids whose parents shopped like nutritionists. You knew your friend's house was different when Product 19 showed up on the breakfast table instead of Sugar Pops or Fruit Loops. The texture was dry, the flavor was cardboard, but it made you feel responsible. Like eating it might actually make you taller, or better at math. It was the cereal version of homework. And if you had to suffer through it just to get the toy buried in the box, you earned it. But some families did not even bother with cereal. They just went straight for toast. Not with jam, not with butter, but with something far more intense. Tell us your favorite forgotten breakfast down below. And if you love digging through old cookbooks, like and subscribe for more.